Okay. Welcome, everyone, to this week's live office hours with Dr. Judd. Hope everybody is doing as well as they can today and has had a good week of settling into the new norm, which is not knowing, resting in the not knowing, perhaps. Just a couple of updates before we get started. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Dr. Judd Brewer. I'm what am I? I'm an addiction psychiatrist and neuroscientist, focusing on habit change. I'm the director of research and innovation at the Mindfulness Center at Brown University, also the founder of Mind Sciences. So I'm coming to you live from my shelter-in-place home. This is my wife's office, and we're in Worcester, Massachusetts. I'm also here with our tech whiz, Josh Roman, who's the Chief Product Officer at Mind Sciences, who has graciously agreed to help run the tech things of these live office hours. So I hope everybody's doing okay. I just want to, as a welcome for everyone, and some of you are already doing this, love to hear where you're all from. So I see some folks from Europe, some folks from different parts in the United States. So it's great to see folks here. What we'll do is I'm going to give a short synopsis on one of the topics that I talked about last week on my YouTube channel, and then we will dive into questions from you, and we'll see how far we can go from there. So we'll just give everybody a moment to sign in a little bit and say where they're from. Folks from Texas, Toronto, Canada, our wonderful neighbors to the north. Welcome, everyone. Florida, Portland, Oregon. So welcome. From the Northwest, the Southeast, and the middle of the United States. I see some folks from Kansas City and from Michigan, near and dear to my heart. I grew up in Indiana, which the folks from the coasts often call flyover land. By taking a moment to take a moment together. So maybe just settling in, noticing what your body is feeling right now. Maybe feeling your feet, grounding your awareness in your breath. Whatever is helpful to provide that anchor in this present moment. I really like the image of the feet. One, because we don't hold anxiety in our feet. And two, because it really can feel like an anchor that grounds us to the earth. You know, it's kind of like if we're in a ship out at sea or a sailboat, and there's really strong currents or winds blowing. If we set that anchor, doesn't matter how strong those winds blow, we might not even notice that we're being blown. But if we are anchored, we can see what those thoughts and those emotions and those feelings feel like, because we are able to observe them rather than being carried away by them. So let's just take a moment to ground ourselves, and we'll stop talking. And whether we've grounded ourselves in our feet or our hands or seeing or whatever anchor helps us stay in the present moment, just noticing what it feels like once we've anchored ourselves, even for a little bit. It's really helpful just to check in with your experience so we can see the difference between being carried away or lost or being blown or carried by the currents and being grounded, being rooted in one spot. This actually helps our brains start to see the difference between being lost and, so to speak, being found. And I don't know about for you, but I'd much rather see what's carrying me away than be carried away by it. And when I can see that clearly, and when I can rest in awareness and rest in my present moment experience, it just feels better than being lost. And each time I can help my brain see how much better it feels, I actually help hack into that reward-based learning system. And so that my brain can start to learn, oh, actually being present, even if it's with strong emotions, is better than being lost. So I thought we would do a brief recap from one of the topics that seemed really live last week. But first, I'll give a brief announcement. Our lab has done a study with anxious physicians starting a couple of years ago now, and that was just published last week. And that study was, unfortunately, the easiest study I've ever recruited for. It took a single email from the CEO of the health system. This was at UMass Memorial Healthcare based in Worcester, Massachusetts, up at the hospital and the medical system at the medical school here. And there were so many anxious physicians that single email recruited all the folks that we needed. The good news was that, we could find a very significant result with people simply using our unwinding anxiety app. So at baseline, we just checked to see if, there were correlations between anxiety and burnout. And in fact, there were strong correlations between anxiety and things like callousness and emotional exhaustion. Then we had people use the Unwinding Anxiety app as a way to give them small bite-sized pieces of training. And lo and behold, we got a 57% reduction in these clinically validated anxiety scores. So we were really happy to see that, especially because healthcare providers are on the front lines right now and need solutions that are going to be simple, evidence-based, and that they can take in bite-sized pieces rather than having to do a lot right now because they're already doing a lot. So for anybody that's interested, I put a short video out last week that highlighted some of that and how mindfulness can help with anxiety, especially for healthcare providers, and help them not get burnt out. There's also a press release from Brown University that you can take a look at on my website. What I thought we could talk about today was this other topic that's really hot right now. I just got an interview request from a reporter this morning and we talked about anxiety and eating. So she was wondering, what I'm noticing with people's eating habits, so to speak, amongst this. And I think that's a really timely topic because not only do we have the propensity to set up where we might not be in the routine of being at work and only bringing our lunch, for example, but we've got, access to the refrigerator 24/7. Many of you are probably familiar with some of the habit loops that get created around food that are based on our survival mechanisms. If you're not familiar with those, I think I did a brief video on this last week. Also have a short animation on my website that we had an animator do a great job with. You can check that out. But the one-liner is that, remembering our food helps us survive. And in modern day, when we know where the refrigerator is, we don't have to use those reward-based learning mechanisms where we're triggered by hunger that, the behavior is to go find food. And then the reward is that dopamine signal that comes to our brain from our stomach when we eat some food that says, remember what you eat and what you just ate and where you found it. In fact, we're moving toward things like negative emotions where we feel anxious or we feel worried or we feel out of control. There's a lot of feelings of out of controlness right now because we just don't know what's going on, and we don't have information to plan for a month from now. So that dis-ease can activate those same feelings in our bodies that say, go do something. And so we go do something by going to the refrigerator, and that stress eating comes not from hunger, physiologic hunger. We call this homeostatic hunger, but it comes from hedonic hunger, which is just a fancy term for emotional hunger. And that emotional hunger leads to the behavior of stress eating. And then when we stress eat, we might get a brief hit of dopamine, or we distract ourselves from the unpleasant feelings, and then that gets set up as a habit loop. So if you are noticing that your eating habits are changing, or you're forming habits around eating now when you didn't have them before, it's really helpful to just map that out. We've done a study, or I should say that Ashley Mason at UCSF led a study a couple of years ago with our Eat Right Now app, where we found a 40% reduction in craving-related eating. But the key there was to help people map out, why they were reaching for food. Were they actually hungry, or were they stressed? What they were reaching for, what type of food? Was it junk food, or was it healthy food? The reporter that I spoke with this morning was talking about some health update, I think that her news site was just reporting on, where they talked, or maybe this is the Rhode Island Public Health Commissioner or something, where he was talking about, instead of reaching for the strawberry Pop-Tarts, reach for the strawberries. It's a very different experience when you've got something that's engineered to be addictive versus some strawberries. We get that fullness in our stomach, and then we don't feel that urge to eat more. It's really different. I can certainly speak from my own experience. I moved from eating entire bags of gummy worms in one sitting to eating blueberries. I absolutely love blueberries, and that's my go-to sweet now, because they have this natural sweetness. They don't taste like petroleum products, and they leave me satisfied as compared to craving more. So maybe with that as an introduction to this week, I'd be happy to start with topics and questions around the topic of eating. And then if there aren't any specific questions around stress eating, whether you're struggling with stress eating or there's something that you wanted to know about that, let's start there. If you don't have questions about that, then you can just post a more general question about, mindfulness and mental health, or some of the mental health things that we're all struggling with right now as we go through this together. So if you post those in the live chat, Josh will curate those and bring those forward to me, and then we'll start diving in. So maybe as a moment, for folks to kind of sit and think about a topic they might like to discuss, we can just take a moment together. Maybe dropping that anchor again, anchor of the breath, anchor of the feet, or maybe just an anchor of hearing, maybe hearing what's in the room or the sound of my voice. Or maybe the anchor of seeing, whether it's looking at the screen or looking around the room. Maybe taking one more conscious breath. And now I will take a look at these questions. So, first question, a couple of questions around eating. So thank you all for those. Ideally, this would be a dialogue, but Facebook Live isn't set up for that so much for a give and take. So I'm going to apologize for folks if I that somebody put forward is, I'm eating more at home than I used to, but I'm not feeling intense stress. Do you think it actually is stress? That's a really good question. I'm eating more at home than I used to, but I'm not feeling intense stress. Do you think it actually is stress? Well, I don't know your experience, but I can give you something to play with so that you can actually check to see what it is. So there are a couple of things you can do to play with this. One is you can check in with yourself to see what that urge is to eat, right? Am I what does that actually feel like? Is it driven based on physiologic hunger? I just mentioned the word homeostatic hunger. So is there, is your stomach empty? Is it rumbling? Are there telltale tension as you eat? And ask this simple question: how little is enough? And really pay attention with each bite to see, oh, okay, I'm satisfied, or I'm actually getting over full. And the third thing that you might play with, and goes for anybody that's trying to figure out whether it's actually stress eating or not, is to really and just check in with ourselves and notice, okay, what am I feeling? What am I feeling in my body right now? And is there a way to just kind of give our bodies and our minds that space to kind of declare or tell us what this is? Oh, is this masked stress? Is this hidden stress? Or is it something else? I guess there's one more thing that I can also recommend is we can check in with our bodies to see if we're just holding tension or stress. We might be doing that, not even noticing it. So for example, checking in with the places where we tend to hold stress. For me, it's in my shoulders, right? So are my shoulders attached to my ears right now? Oh, I didn't even notice that. So, there's me holding stress. Or is it a kind of a restlessness in my chest? Is my jaw kind of tight? And the other place that we often don't look, and I think I'll do a video about this week, is checking in with our eyes. Our eyes and the muscles around our eyes can be a really good tell for whether we're stressed and maybe holding some chronic tension. We might not even notice that. So those are a couple of places we can check in to see if it's actually stress or not. So hopefully that's helpful for that first question. Thank you. And I encourage anyone to explore, when you're reaching for food, to first check in and ask yourself, well, am I actually hungry? So let's just take a moment and just check in with ourselves, take a breath together before we move on to the next question. Kind of let that discussion digest in our experience. Okay. So next question: can anxiety manifest itself as a feeling of physical hunger? Oh, this is such a great question. So thank you for asking this. So when I was just years ago now, I'm thinking back to my clinic, I was working with a lot of folks with binge eating disorder. And we can think of binge eating disorder as this habit loop around eating gone, really awry, really struggling. I'll give you an example of a patient actually to highlight what this is like. I had a patient who was in her late 20s who was very overweight, and she was referred to me for binge eating. And what she described was that based on some emotional abuse she had had as a kid, that she had actually learned the habit of eating as a way to numb herself from her negative emotions. Those were the words she used: numb herself, numb myself. And so we mapped out these habit loops where she would have this negative emotion that would trigger a binge. That was the behavior. And then the reward was numbing out because it felt better than the negative emotion itself. In fact, she would binge on entire large pizzas 20 out of 30 days a month. And she would sometimes even binge a second time on top of that first binge. And this was actually a term that Josh, who's on the call with me, had gave me a great phrase for this. He called it echo habit loops. He would have this echo habit loop where that binge would trigger a second binge because, and she would sometimes binge on top of a binge. So that probably gives an idea of some of the struggles that some of my patients were going through who had been referred to me for binge eating disorder. So I was working with this group of people with binge eating disorder and was teaching them mindfulness. And there was a class that I remember really specifically where we started talking about this question, can anxiety manifest itself as a feeling of physical hunger? And so I went up to the whiteboard and we started mapping this out. Okay, what are symptoms of hunger? What are symptoms of anxiety? And we realized from their experience, and I went back and confirmed this when I looked at the literature afterwards, that there's a lot of overlap between some symptoms of actual hunger, homeostatic hunger, and hedonic hunger, that emotional hunger. For example, we can feel restless when we're anxious, and we can also feel restless when we're hungry. Both of those urge us into action, and there are other ones as well. So we actually developed this little algorithm that made its way, became incorporated into our Eat Right Now app, where we have people go through a checklist of different things and check off, is your stomach empty? Yes or no? Are you feeling restless? Are you having difficulty concentrating and things like that? And so in that way, they could start to drop in and do a little bit of a mindfulness practice itself and see, okay, what am I actually feeling? And then we would have them report on how recently they ate, so we could rank some of the, or more heavily weight some of these symptoms that shared characteristics between eating and anxiety. So for example, restlessness or difficulty concentrating. So if somebody just ate, an hour ago, then that difficulty concentrating would be more heavily weighted toward anxiety. Whereas if they hadn't eaten for 6 hours or something like that, then it's more likely that that could be hunger than anxiety. So that's a long story, short story long, in the sense that there's quite a bit out there suggesting that anxiety can manifest itself as feelings of hunger. But I wouldn't say real, true hunger, because when we're anxious, I don't know anybody that said, yeah, my stomach feeling as actual hunger. So there are a lot of overlapping symptoms, but there are also some that are pretty distinct between the two. And the way that we can tell the difference is to bring our awareness to our own experience. Oh, is this, is my stomach feeling empty? Or am I, are my shoulders attached to my ears? And as we start to pay attention to our own direct experience more and more and more, we can start to differentiate for ourselves whether we're actually anxious or physically hungry. So thank you for that question. Let's just let that settle in as we all take a breath together. Okay. I'm going to do one or two more with the eating bit, and then we'll open it up. There's a lot of great questions around anxiety and overeating. So the next one's around, why does anxiety cause overeating in some people and loss of appetite in others? Great question. So from a physiologic standpoint, okay, let's think about this from a survival standpoint. What is our natural response if we are, if we're out on the savannah, our ancient ancestors are out on the savannah and they're being chased. So we only have a certain amount of blood in our body. We don't have enough blood to really have it pumped to all the organs and our muscles at the same time. It would probably weigh us down too much and be inefficient in other ways. So our bodies actually have systems set up physiologically to shunt blood to certain systems based on what it needs, which is, basically a fancy term for, it'll cut blood off from certain parts of the body and it will give it to other parts because it's a limited resource. So when we are being, when we're being chased, there's this saying, eat or when we're being chased, when we're about to be eaten, our job is to, or our physiologic natural response is for our body to shunt that blood from our digestive organs into our muscles so that we can run. Now, once we are out of danger, and let's say, or we have run down our meal for the day, or run around and collected the berries for the day, when we're out of danger and we can sit down to eat a meal, then our body moves all that blood from our muscles into our digestive organs. So here, when we can actually see that the natural response when we're anxious is ideally to kind of cause a loss of appetite. That's what the technical term anorexia is for. It's different than anorexia nervosa, which is a condition with kind of not eating. That's a psychiatric condition, but the term anorexia just basically means not eating. We're losing an appetite, and that's a physiologic response to stress. So if we're anxious, the normal physiologic response is to lose that appetite. Yet at other times, somebody might overeat when they're stressed. And so what's going on here? You would think that the physiologic response would be to say, hey, stop eating. There's danger here. Well, overeating happens in modern day in probably a combination of a number of reasons. One is that there's an abundance of food. Second is that there's a lot of stuff that is engineered to be food-like, and I use the word stuff specifically because I wouldn't really call it food. And so we can learn to stress eat, or we can learn to eat when we're bored, or learn to eat when we're lonely, or we can learn all sorts of habits around eating. We can eat mindlessly. We go to we get trained to do this at the movie theater as a kid, where we get that big tub of popcorn and we're so enthralled with the movie that, we've got this big tub of popcorn and we have no idea where it went by the end of the movie. It's gone, but we don't remember eating it because we've been focusing on watching the movie. And then that translates to home when we're all socially isolated, but watching Netflix at night. Our body says, oh, feels so good to be when I was a kid at the movie theater, but there's something missing. Oh yeah, the popcorn. And we've associated popcorn with watching movies, and we've associated eating popcorn mindlessly with watching movies. So there's just one example of all the multitude ways that we can actually set up habits around eating where we'll overeat because we're not actually paying attention, and that anxiety triggers that eating response, just like I mentioned with my binge eating disordered patient, where we eat to numb ourselves. So we could eat when we're bored, we could eat mindlessly, or we could eat specifically to numb ourselves. And some of that comes from the dopamine hit that comes from eating junk food. We tend not to binge on broccoli. Tends to be more things like carbs, sugar and fat combinations that really hit that dopamine system. So hopefully that gives a little bit of an answer around how anxiety can lead us to have a loss of appetite. That's a normal physiologic response. But anxiety could also lead us to overeat because we've set up the habit around eating when we're stressed. And that critical difference right there is, have we set up a habit or not? And the good news is, if we pay attention, we can differentiate the two. It's not that hard to figure out. And we can start to unwind some of these old habits around stress eating, especially if we see that the stress eating, only temporarily, numbs us or makes us feel bloated or feel guilty or whatever. And we can actually unwind some of these. For example, my patient with binge eating disorder she learned mindfulness and did, she ended up basically stopped binging, and she lost a bunch of weight. I think she lost 40 pounds. But the piece that was really amazing to me that I remember from her case was that she said, I can eat a single piece of pizza and actually enjoy it, which is a beautiful example of how mindfulness helps us move from avoiding objects like, oh, I can't go near pizza, that's a problem, to changing our relationship to them and seeing that the object's not the problem, it's our relationship. And if we can bring awareness in, we can actually change that relationship. So hopefully that's helpful for folks who might find themselves overeating when they're anxious. Hopefully it will help you break some of any habits that you might have or might be forming, especially as we go through these uncertain times. Uncertainty is tough for our brains, and our brains say, well, do something, to feel certain. Well, if we eat food, it feels like we're doing something, and that can set up habits that end up that right now are not healthy and then can lead to being reinforced where it's really hard to break them in the future. So let's take a breath together. Let that digest. Okay. So thanks again for that question. There's another question. This will be our last question with the eating, and then we'll move into other topics. So this is kind of a two-part question. I'll read them both, but then I'm going to start with the second part. So how do you tell the difference between feeling satisfied and craving more? And then the second part is, I'm not very hungry these days, but I know I need to eat. When I eat, it always feels like I'm overeating, but there's not much on my plate. Do I go with my stomach and not eat so much? Actually, so let's start with the first part of that two-part question. How to tell the difference between feeling satisfied and craving more? So here, I think we can really focus on a very simple aspect of our experience. There's so many pieces of experience or qualities of experience that we have in any one moment. It can be hard to know which one to pay attention to. Something that my lab's been studying for a while now, and we're doing some research on this right now, is this aspect of experience around whether something feels more closed down or contracted versus something feels more opened up or expanded. And this applies directly to eating as well. So this person asks, how can you tell the difference between feeling satisfied and craving more? So let's anchor ourselves for anybody that hasn't explored this question around closed versus open, just to make sure we're anchoring our own experience, and so we know, what I'm talking about. If you just remember a time when you were anxious or afraid, and as recently as possible would be really helpful. Does it feel more closed or does it feel more open? So just feel into your experience. When I feel anxious or when I feel afraid, does it feel closed or does it feel open? I don't know anybody that has felt anxious and said, yeah, I feel very open when I'm anxious. In fact, these fear responses that we have are set up evolutionarily to help us, make ourselves as small as object or small in objects or a target as possible for something that's chasing us down. So it's we could expect that we would feel closed when we're afraid or when we're anxious. The opposite of that, of fear, I would say, or anxiety, would be something like joy. So does joy feel more closed, contracted, or does it feel more open and expanded? We've actually done some research on this, and over 90 to, I don't remember the exact number, 90 to 95% of people, these are just normal people responding, say that joy feels open. So we can think of those two ends of the spectrum. Fear and anxiety are on one end of the spectrum. Joy, things like curiosity, connection, are on the other end of the spectrum, feeling more open. So that's a little bit of background around how to tell the difference between feeling satisfied and craving more. So for anybody that's pondering this question, you can just feel into your experience and think of a time recently when you were really craving something, whether it was food or, connection or whatever, and see what does craving feel like? Does it feel closed or does it feel open? And for some of us, it might not be that easy to tell what craving actually, if it feels closed or open, because often we think about the object of our craving, but I'm talking about the craving itself. So really focus in on the craving. Is there a restless quality to it? Does it feel closed? Does it feel driven? From a survival standpoint, the craving is there to get us to go do something. Right? So it typically has a pretty restless quality to it. And when people really focus in on craving, and you can do this from your own experience, see if it's true for you, craving tends to feel pretty different in terms of, as compared to being satisfied, where there's this restless, driven quality to it, whereas satisfied, and I'll even use the word content. We specifically use the word content over satisfied in some of our research studies because it takes into account not just physiologic state, not just how hungry are we or not, but also our emotions and our thoughts. And contentment in our studies is shown to be feeling more open. So we can really just focus in on that quality of experience. Does it feel closed? Does it feel open? And that might help us zoom in on, that there's this restless, closed down quality of my experience. Is that urging me to go get something, go get some food, for example? That can help point to this being a craving. Or is there an open quality to my experience? Am I feeling balanced? Like I don't need anything else. That's where I think of contentment or balance or even equanimity comes in. So we can focus on those pieces, and that can help us tell the difference between feeling satisfied and craving more. So let's go to the second part of the question, which is I'm not feeling very hungry these days, but I know I need to eat. When I eat, it always feels like I'm overeating, but there's not much on my plate. Do I go with my stomach and not eat so much? I think this is a really good question. It's going to be hard for me to answer this without having a conversation with the person that's asking this, because there could be a bunch of things. It's kind of like somebody, this is one reason that doctors tend not to, it's hard for us to diagnose things from over the phone or hearing or reading something, because it's really important to get a back and forth to really understand what somebody's experience is. So I'm just going to give some really high level things here because it's going to be challenging for me to really get a sense of for example, why you're not feeling very hungry these days. Is it because of stress? Is it because of something else? And it's really helpful for you to explore, what is it that's leading to that lack of hunger? Is it, is it stress? Is it anxiety? Is it that loss of appetite that comes with the physiologic, the normal survival response to shunt all of our blood to our muscles so that we're ready to run? Is that the cause for that? And so that, finding that cause is going to really help figure out what would be the best thing to do, And so going with the stomach and not eat so much, it's really hard for me to say. And I don't want to kind of give you, a suggestion that might not be helpful. So here I would say, check in with your experience, see what's going on, and then what's that underlying cause, and see if that can help you from there. Let's just pause, take a breath together, let all of this sink in before we shift to some more general topics. Okay, so thank you for those great questions around eating and stress and anxiety. Let's shift gears a little bit. Next question's around how to think about self-care. I run a karate school, been trying to be a source of reliability and good information for my community. I find it's exhausting me in surprising ways. Yeah, so there could be many ways that we explore this topic, how to think about self-care. I think, it might have been just last Friday, I talked about burnout and self-care there. So that video that I put out on YouTube last week is probably maybe worth taking a look at. But kind of to keep this brief, one way to think about self-care is first, to check to see if we are being a modern day martyr. In the medical profession, it is, we learn in medical school to be tough, to never show weakness. We can certainly empathize with our patients, but we can't be showing emotions ourselves, because we need to be that rock, that foundation that everybody can rely on. So we tend to stuff down our emotions. We tend not to take care of ourselves. And then, surprise, there's this epidemic of clinician and physician burnout that's happening right now. So it's really important to first check in to see, okay, what am I doing? What am I feeling an urge to do? And is it born out of, like, I want to help? And is that driving me to the point where I'm not actually able to help? Because if we are exhausted, if we are burnt out, then we're not actually going to be able to be that bedrock or that foundation for others. For example, anxious or burnt out physicians have been shown to, lead to more medical errors. They have trouble connecting with their patients. Patients rate their relationships as much more poor. There are all these things that happen when physicians are overexerting themselves and getting burnt out, not actually taking care of themselves. And in fact, it makes it hard for them to take care of others. So here, can we be a source of reliability in whatever way, we are most suited? Can we, have we set that foundation to do that? And simple things like making sure that we're eating enough, eating healthy food, and making sure that we're sleeping enough, making sure that we're doing our own self-care, whether it's meditation, prayer, exercise, or all of the above, to the degree that we can right now. I know that everybody is often very, very busy. So are we taking care of ourselves? And if we're not, starting there, making sure we do take care of ourselves. If we feel an urge to be helpful for others, to step back and ask ourselves, well, am I feeling driven to do this? Is there some martyrdom? Could I even be setting up a habit around this where, the trigger is when somebody calls for help, and then my automatic reaction is to help them no matter what, even if I don't have the resources to do that. And then the reward is that they thank me, or I feel good or whatnot. It doesn't mean that helping shouldn't feel good. Absolutely. It feels great. But if we get in the habit of always just saying yes, 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 we're going to burn ourselves out and become that modern day martyr. So I think it's really important to step back and make sure we're checking in with ourselves to know, am I burning myself out? Am I the best person to help here when somebody is asking? And can I resource somebody or send somebody to another resource that might be more helpful? And at the same time, make sure that I can keep my batteries charged so that I can be helpful. So in that way, this person ended the question, it's exhausting me in surprising ways. Yeah, we can certainly be surprised at how exhausting this can be, especially, if we're doing things when we're tired, or doing things that we may not be the best person to be doing, and aren't realizing that because we're just stepping in to help because it feels good to help. So let's just let that settle in. Hopefully that's helpful. We'll take a breath together and move on to the next question. So there's a question about, one person asks, I'm curious about positive affirmations versus mindfulness and the empty brain. They seem to bite each other. How to see that? It's a good question. So let's just, and this is just how I view positive affirmations versus mindfulness. So others might have other concepts of this, and if they're different, that's fine. I'm not trying to say that I'm the expert about positive affirmations. I certainly have a lot more experience with mindfulness training than positive affirmation. What I understand, and the little that I understand about positive affirmations, is there's a subcategory of positive psychology that has studied and looked at positive affirmations. Basically, saying good things, basically affirming ourselves. Now, if we can think about this from a habit loop perspective. So if we're in the habit of beating ourselves up, for example, so if we do something, that's the trigger, and then the behavior is to judge ourselves, then there's this result that, we beat ourselves up. We might feel like we're doing something because we're beating ourselves up, but it's not actually that helpful for us and can lead to bad things down the road. So you could see, well, what if we just replace beating ourselves up with being positive? Whatever the positive phrase is. It would make sense from a learning standpoint. Okay, if I can just replace the negative with the positive, it's all good. And in fact, there was a study that was published back in 2005. It was somebody in Barb Fredrickson, who's a positive psychologist, where they came up with this 3-to-1 positivity ratio, where they took college student diaries, I think, and they plugged them into a nonlinear fluid dynamics equation and came up with this magic formula that, if you just have 3 positive thoughts to every one negative thought, then you'll, win the game, that you'll have a good life. Long story short, and unfortunately, Barb wrote a whole book on this that was published a couple of years later. That was completely debunked. You can't really plug college student diaries into physics equations and expect to get accurate, information. You should leave physics to physics and psychology to psychology. So I think the field learned a good lesson from that, which is we have to be careful about, what we're talking about and the claims that we're making about things. So with positive affirmations, there isn't some magic ratio that if we just do positive affirmations, we're going to win the game. The other thing to keep in mind is that habit loops are habit loops. So if we get in the habit of, if I have a negative thought, I just need to replace it with a positive thought, then that can actually lead to a habit of, I need to do this, which can keep us stuck in that cycle of habits. The other thing is that the positive affirmation doesn't always make us feel good. So it's not a consistent thing. And just like slot machines at a casino, if something's inconsistent, we can get in the habit of doing them more. We pull the lever more and more and more until it works. So if we look to positive affirmation to make ourselves feel good, for example, there can be some problems there. And the other bigger problem that I see here is that the cognitive control parts of our minds, which I think are more involved in, like you're replacing unhelpful thoughts with helpful ones. That part of the brain goes offline when we get stressed out. So it might not be that reliable, especially when we're stressed. So the difference between those, doing a positive affirmation, like replacing some negative thought with a positive thought, and mindfulness, is that mindfulness isn't about doing anything. It's just simply about being with our experience. So that doing is being, and it's changing the relationship to our experience rather than trying to change the experience itself. So instead of having a positive affirmation or needing to do anything about our experience, we simply bring a curious awareness in and notice, here's this negative thought. I'm feeling bad. I'm pushing it away, or I'm holding on to it because I'm identified with it. Like, I'm a bad person. And we can start to realize, these are just thoughts. We don't need to change the thought. We don't need to change anything. We can simply, by bringing awareness in, we can change our relationship to it and realize, here's this thought. It can come and go. Here's this emotion. It can come and go. And in that way, it really frees us up to step out of those habit loops entirely, so that we don't have to do anything about our experience. We can simply rest in a curious kind of awareness of that experience itself. So I'll just pause there and let that sink in for anyone that wants to explore the difference between positive affirmations and mindfulness. Okay, I'm just checking the time. We have time for probably one or two more questions. So there's another question about what is effortless attention and its relationship to awareness of emotions? It's a great question. So there are a lot of terms out there, and I like to try to keep these as concrete as possible. So there's a term like effortless attention, effortless awareness. I tend to use the word awareness more because that's something that's pretty concrete. We're either aware of something. For example, you're aware of the sound of my voice, or you're aware of this video and seeing me. You might be aware of things in the room around you. So we're either aware or we're not. So there's awareness. And in terms of putting the qualifier in there in terms of effortless, what I would ask is, when you're listening to the sound of my voice, how much effort does it take? If you're just sitting here listening, you're not distracted by other things. If you're distracted, that's a different story, where you might have to, select what you pay attention to. But if you're just unitasking, if you're just paying attention to this video and you don't have 4 different windows open on your computer and you're trying to do 4 things at once and check your emails and, check your texts and check your social media, but you're simply just paying attention right here, unitasking rather than multitasking, how much effort does it take to hear the sound of my voice? How much effort does it take to see my the picture of my video? It really doesn't take effort because our brains know how to hear. Our brains know how to see. We don't have to tell ourselves, okay, see, hear. It just happens, which is good because it wouldn't work so well otherwise. Taste, feel. We had to do all those things all the time. We wouldn't do so well at surviving. So the way I think of effortless awareness is really the quality of awareness that comes when we're simply resting in, in awareness of whatever sensory experiences we're having, and we're not distracted by this or that. And so that can be the second part of this question. What is effortless? I'm going to say awareness and its relationship to awareness of emotions. So here too, we can bring that quality of awareness and that effortless quality in when we're noticing emotions. When we have an emotion and we're, especially I think with curiosity, that attitude of curiosity with mindfulness can really help us zoom in on an emotion itself. Oh, what is that emotion? Maybe we can all take a moment to just do that right now and just ask ourselves, what emotions am I feeling right now? Let that curiosity guide you into your own direct experience. What am I feeling right now? I'll do the same. What am I feeling? So I'm feeling a little bit of joy. It's kind of in my chest and stomach area, some calmness. And so there can be that effortless quality of awareness that comes with paying attention to emotions as well. And so just like it's effortless to be aware of sounds, like the sound of my voice, and it's effortless to see things if our vision is working, so too can that interoceptive awareness be effortless. Interoceptive being a fancy term for bringing awareness to our inner landscape, what we feel inside of ourselves, such as emotions. And so we can be aware in an effortless way of anything, our felt experience, our hearing, our seeing, and whatnot. So hopefully that gives you a little something to explore around, effortless attention, as the original question was, effortless awareness and its relationship to awareness of emotions. I'm noticing an urge to just add a little piece on here around, I'll just add briefly, there's a critical quality to this attitudinal quality of mindfulness that I struggled with for the first decade of my practice, which was that I was really trying to force my awareness to pay attention to my breath or another object, especially my breath. And it took a long time for me to realize that it was actually the attitudinal foundation of being curious that would actually help draw my awareness into that experience rather than be trying to force it. And it was it was literally, like curiosity made it effortless because I was interested. Oh, what is this experience? So for anyone that might be struggling with meditation practice or being aware of their experience or being aware of emotions, see if you can really tap into that, the superpower of curiosity. And I wrote a whole article on my website about curiosity as a superpower. And I will probably put a short video out this week on my YouTube channel around how curiosity is that superpower and how it can actually help foster and develop awareness of our emotions, as well as help us meditate. So I'm just going to pause there. Maybe we'll take a breath together and see if there's time for one more question. Okay, so the last question of the day is this. It was more of a general question about sleeping. And so what I will say, just given we only have a couple of minutes left, I did a YouTube video on specifically about sleep, maybe a week or two ago. So I would recommend taking a look at that video. It's pretty short and is very focused on, okay, what might be getting in the way of sleep and how can we actually help foster our sleep. The two lines on that is, can we notice what it is that's leading to sleeplessness? What's actually causing this? Am I drinking caffeine too late in the day? Am I eating a bunch of food? Am I drinking alcohol at night? There are a bunch of things that can contribute to difficulty with getting to sleep and staying asleep. And I put some resources on that video around proper sleep hygiene. Am I using screens in bed? Am I checking the news right before bed? Don't check the news right before bed. So there are a bunch of things that we can just do a checklist off and to make sure that we're not doing those things. And if we've checked all those things off and we're not drinking caffeine, we're not checking the news, we're not doing all these things, and we're still having trouble sleeping, whether it's falling asleep or we're waking up early, my favorite practice is what I teach to my patients in my clinic is the body scan. It's a great way to bring our awareness into our body and not feed. So I see so many times my patients their brains are running at night. They're worrying, their head is a pillow and they start worrying about the next day or regretting something that they've just done. The body scan can really help people just pay attention to their direct embodied experience, not feed the cycle of habit loops around worry. And at the same time, sometimes when we scan through our body, we notice that we're holding tension somewhere. And it's not like we need to force ourselves to relax. Simply by noticing, oh, my shoulders are raised. Just by noticing that, my body says, wow, that's uncomfortable. Feels much better to be relaxed. And so we naturally relax. So here I would say, take a look at the video and see if the body scan's a really good way to help. I posted a body scan on the YouTube channel. If you're not familiar with it, there are also many other resources that offer body scans as well. If you don't like the sound of my voice or the way that I guide it, there are plenty of other ones out there. So we are right at the end of the hour. Maybe we can just take a breath together. Notice what it's like to be together as this community. And I think I'll just leave it with a couple of quick announcements. One is we've put out this free app called Breathe by Dr. Judd. If you don't have a lot of experience with mindfulness, bunch of free guided meditations on there. We've just updated the app so that you can, there are a bunch of new features on there. There's a breathing exercise, there are guided meditations, etc. You can take a look at that on my website, which is just drjudd.com. And then the daily videos, I'll put out another video each weekday this week. You can take a look at those. You can take a look at some of the old ones if you haven't seen them. And then join us if you found this helpful. Join us again next week if you think somebody else might benefit from it. Have them take a look or have them join us next week as well. And until then, just wish you all well as we move forward together into the unknown. So take care.